I'd like to start off just talking a little bit in general about Dürer's Melancholia I of 1514. It's an engraving. It's one of his largest engravings. There were 3 engravings that he did around this time that are generally considered to be the master engravings. There's the Knight, Death and Devil, and there's St. Jerome in his study, and there's Melancholia. And taken together, they form sort of a group which looks at morality, at spirituality, and intellectualism, and humanism in a way. For the last 500 years, this print has probably been looked at, written about, dissected more than any other engraving in the Western world, and there's really no solid agreement on what it means. It's still open to interpretation. What we have is a winged figure with a little puto on her shoulder, scribbling something on a slate. And generally it's been considered to be a representation of melancholia, but specifically melancholia associated with creativity, with the artist, possibly the artist who's frustrated with not being able to forge ahead, who's stymied. There are all the instruments of measurement and geometry, for instance, the caliper, all the tools of carpentry. And then there are strange things like Dürer's solid, which initially was always thought just to be a truncated cube, which is what I've done with mine. I've actually just made a cube, cut off 2 sides and placed it. But there are also many theories out there, especially among mathematicians and geometrists and the people who are interested in the occult and the arcane, that it's not a cube at all, that it's a polyhedron with very specific angles, and the angles are hotly debated on things like Wolfram's Math World. So if you want to go online, you can find hours and hours and hours of research on this and debate. And it gets crazy actually after a while. You just have to shut it down because it becomes meaningless, I think. There's the ladder with its 7 rungs. There is a comet or a meteorite. There is a rainbow or a moonbow. There are flooded islands in the background. Most interpretations think that this is a night scene. The face of the angel is very dark, and that's because melancholia has always been associated with black bile in the Renaissance interpretation of the 4 humors. Anyway, I've been looking at this print, I think, since childhood, because I first came across it in my father's art books, and I've always been fascinated by it. And also, strictly from a technical point of view, it's just incredibly well done. And it still has that aura of mystery about it. So what I've done with my installation is I've taken some of these elements and I've made discrete objects, but I've also referenced in my work more contemporary artists. So what I think I'd like to do is take each of the specific objects and look at them individually. So we'll look at Dürer's solid first, and this is a piece called Melancholy by Anselm Kiefer. And he did a lot of variations using this solid. There's another piece where he has a lead airplane, a lead fighter jet, almost life-size, and Dürer's solid actually sits on top of that. So he has referenced this piece many, many times over his career. Then this is an artist named John Cornu, who I really know nothing about because I pulled this off the internet. But again, if you go on the internet and put in Dürer's solid contemporary art, you'll come up with probably at least a dozen examples in various media of artists who have used this in their work. Miroslav Balka did a beautiful concrete one. There's an artist in Toronto named Jade Rood who recently, a few years ago, did one covered in gold leaf. It crops up everywhere, over and over and over again. A few years ago, I made a road trip down the Hudson Valley to New York City, and I stopped at Dia Beacon. And there's a room full of Donald Judd's plywood boxes. Most of them are very simple, just a variation on the cube, using birch plywood, brass screws. And so I've directly referenced that as well here, because I used the same material, essentially the same construction method as Donald Judd. And you know, bringing the solid into the realm of minimalism in a way. But then I kind of mess around with that too, because there's always been the theory that when you look at the surface of Dürer's print, there's a very faint outline of a skull or a face on it. And that's also being hotly debated. So if you look at my cube, you can't see it from here, but tucked in the inside is a gold leaf representation of the skull. It's taken from a piece I did years ago where I actually had gold leaf that skull onto a steel shield and had hung it from a tree. But I've since basically destroyed it. I just cut that skull out and have tacked it onto the inside of Dürer's solid, almost like a plaque, almost like a signature. Then we move on to the sphere. And in Dürer's print, the sphere is just a very simple sphere, possibly made out of stone or turned out of wood. In mine, I've played with the sphere, but also with the instruments of measurement. And in a sense, I've created my own calipers, my own kind of pantograph. And if you look at mine eventually, you'll see that there is a small golden sphere. And the contemporary connection that I've found most interesting is James Lee Byers, who did a series in the 1970s and 80s of golden spheres. Some were small, some were huge. This one's in Paris, situated on a reflecting pool. And he did a show, or actually a gallery did a show of his work a few years ago, and the title was "A Sphere is a Sphere is a Sphere." Then the ladder. My ladder is welded steel. It's 14 feet tall. It's the only piece that I really didn't make myself. I mean, I had it made to specifications by a fabrication company because I'm not a welder. The seventh rung, though, of my ladder is copper leafed because I wanted to pick out the seventh rung. In esoteric literature, the odd numbers of steps were always good luck, because if you started off with your right foot on the lower rung, you stepped off the ladder with your right foot as well, if you had 7 rungs. And there's also the Miles Davis tune, 7 Steps to Heaven. And it shows up as Jacob's ladder in Jewish tradition, Christian tradition, Islamic tradition. This piece here is by Joseph Beuys. It was probably his last fully completed work. It's called Scala Napoletana, and it's a wooden ladder held in suspension by 2 big metal weights. And again, it's something I've been fascinated with for years. But I've also done works with ladder going back years. And this one, it's not a very good image, but it's probably from around the time I would first have met Carol Potted-Warney. And this was at the Hammer Gallery, which was sort of an alternative space in Hamilton here many years ago, run by Jim Mullen and Denise Lisson. And this was again about a 16-foot silver wooden ladder that led up to the ceiling and had a small blue light at the top. Then I did a series of works which I call Trespass, and I would make sculptural objects and leave them around the city in abandoned places, mostly abandoned factory sites. This ladder, again, is about 16 or 18 feet tall. It's just made out of wood, painted blue, very narrow. And this building was at the foot of Stewart Street, where the Rheem factory used to be, and it's now basically brownfields. They've torn it down about 5 or 6 years ago. I left the ladder there. I just placed the ladder there one day. The next day it was gone. There was no sign that it had been destroyed. It just disappeared. I have no idea where it went or who took it. The tri-squares, and I've made 3 of them. The black one in my installation is based directly on the one in the Melancholia print. And again, if you go online, you can find specs for it in Popular Woodworking, for instance. You can find the actual specs to make your own Dürer tri-square out of oak. The red one in my installation, I've based on some work by a German artist named Gerhard Merz, who was doing a lot of work with tri-squares in the 70s and 80s. This is a painting of one, but he also did essentially almost what I've done, where he would make tri-squares out of metal and just lean them against the wall. The rainbow or the moonbow in the print, and that again is debated, because if it's a night scene, it can't be a rainbow, so it has to be a moonbow. This is a Caspar David Friedrich painting from 1810, mountain landscape with a rainbow. But again, the moonbow is much rarer, but it is a documented phenomenon, and actually goes back to Aristotle's meteorology. He was the first to write about it. And it's essentially just a rainbow, but the light is reflected by the moon, so you get white rather than the whole range of the prism, although the range of the prism is there. The visible eye just can't see it. So I've always, I like the way Friedrich's just made this into sort of a silver sliver, and I've kind of based mine on that as well. Mine is cut out of a 1/4 inch aluminum sheet, and then I silver leafed over top of that. The meteorite or the comet. And in 1492, this comet came down in a field in Alsace, not far from where Dürer was living at the time. In fact, there's speculation that he might have seen it. If he didn't see it, he definitely knew about it. Because Emperor Maximilian, who was his patron at the time, happened to be riding through or very close to the spot where this came down. He had this meteorite brought to the local parish church in Ensisheim and had it chained to the altar or to the wall of the church so that it wouldn't fly back up. And then subsequently over the years, small chunks would be sliced off. For instance, one was given to the Pope at the time, so there's a piece in the Vatican Museum, and there's a few other pieces kind of kicking around elsewhere. It's still there. It's actually in a vitrine in the town museum. The one that I've made is out of concrete and stone, and it kind of looks roughly the same shape and size as the actual meteorite here. And this is the back of Dürer's painting, St. Jerome in the Wilderness, in the National Gallery in London. So on the back of the panel is this strange kind of exploding star, which predates the Melancholia print of 1514. So again, it's sort of proof that he must have possibly seen the meteorite or heard about it. He was definitely interested in celestial phenomena. The magic square of 16 panels, 4x4 magic square. Magic squares go back at least to ancient China. They're kind of like a Sudoku puzzle almost, in a way. And the one in Dürer's Melancholia is interesting because if you take any I think there are 12 or 14 combinations where you can take each of the corner numbers or add them up horizontally, add them up vertically. They always add up to 34. What that really signifies, I don't know. He was 43 when he completed Melancholia, so if you transpose the numbers, there's some significance there. There's also a theory that the date of his mother's death is encrypted in there. The date of the print is there because the two numbers at the bottom are there, 1514, side by side. In a way, it's another one of those mysterious objects that, is really totally open to all sorts of interpretation, and people have a lot of fun with that as well. But then again, I've wanted to reference, or I did reference, some artists who have worked a lot with numbers, and this is Onkawara, who, again, installation Dia Beacon, there's a whole room full of these pieces where he just basically did a painting a day for many, many years with just the date. And so the background, he would mix his paint every day, so the background color changes slightly over the course of the years, but it's always sort of gray, grayish green, grayish blue. Jasper John's number painting. My paintings, my panels are done with a sign maker stencil, and very sort of workmanlike. There's nothing really aesthetically pleasing about them, I suppose, but then the wings. The wings that I've used are two photographs that I took at the bayfront here, and unfortunately, when you walk along the shore, you can find all sorts of dismembered birds' wings. And the two photographs in the exhibition, they're not posed at all. That's exactly the way I found them. And I have a whole series of them, actually. So in a way, I wanted to bring the reality and the natural world into the exhibition as well. And that's something that, directly connects with Dürer again, because Dürer did a lot of wing studies and bird studies from dead specimens. This is one called Study of a Wing of a European Blue Roller from 1512. And they're just really beautiful watercolor studies. And this is from a Dürer print called Nemesis. And this was actually part of John Ruskin's teaching collection. He actually destroyed this print and cut out only the wings so that he could show his students, whatever reference he wanted to associate it with. And finally, my final image is a direct connection again. This was a piece I did for a show called Zone 6B, and it was located here in the faculty hollow. A frame was about 7.5 feet by 10 feet wide, just a Baroque frame, empty. But the last vestige of that is attached to my meteorite. The gilded frame on the wall is the last piece of that, because this ended up at the McMichael collection for a year or so, and then in my backyard, and then it just slowly rotted away. And so I wanted to bring sort of everything back around. I don't know, that's really all I have to say.